Hello, my name's Dr. Andy here and I work in the Department of Classics, Ancient History, Archaeology and Egyptology at the University of Manchester. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Roman coins and how they can help historians. Thought I'd start with this picture of a coin showing Juno Moneta, the goddess in whose temple Roman coins were originally struck, and on the rear of the coin we can see how that was done. Roman coins of course are made individually. You have to heat up little blobs of metal, paste them with the tongs on an anvil. On the anvil is a die with the obverse, the front of the coin. You then put another die over the top of the disc, hit it with a hammer to put on the reverse side of the coin as well, and then take it away. All of this of course requires heat, and therefore we can see the cap of Vulcan, the god of fire, over the anvil on this point. Now, when we think about Roman coins, the sorts of coins in your period would have looked quite odd to Romans prior to that, because Romans didn't normally, in the Republican period, put their rulers on coins. Rather, we had gods. So here we've got Apollo, goddess Diana, people who are mythological or from the very distant past, the god Romulus. Rulers didn't feature at all. The place where rulers did regularly feature, of course, were the big Hellenistic kingdoms in the eastern end of the Mediterranean. Their rulers were very keen on having their heads on coins, and very often they would wear a sort of broad band around their head called a diadem to mark themselves out as kings. And here I put a coin of a Hellenistic king, a man called Augustus, who's doing just that. You can see the diadem very clearly there in his hair, marking him out as a king. Now, as the Roman civil wars picked up, this idea also gained a bit of traction in the Roman world. So here are four characters who you all know, all of whom have decided that putting their heads on their coins is really quite a good idea. But it's still worth remembering that even these four also struck coins which didn't have their heads on as well. So when we come to Octavian, and later when Octavian turns into Augustus, the fact he retains his head on coins is a striking deviation from Roman traditions. Now, in our period, of course, it's very important at the beginning to determine yourself as Caesar's legitimate heir. How are we to know, if we're just an ordinary Roman, who Caesar's heir really is? Well, one way of doing that is to make a firm claim and persuade people by using coins. And here we can see Octavian's rival, Mark Antony, doing just that. Two coins here, 6 years apart. On the front is Mark Antony, his name very clearly marked for us, and on the back, equally clearly marked, is a portrait of Julius Caesar. The coin is making a very simple message, isn't it? Antony is the legitimate heir of Julius Caesar. Behind the heads, by the way, are religious items. So the curly stick is something called a lituus, used by a Roman priest called an augur. The little jug behind Caesar's head is an instrument used by another sort of Roman priest called a pontifex, and the two together tended to legitimate the acts of Roman state. Therefore, again, Antony is making a point there, saying I'm behaving legitimately as well as being Caesar's heir. Now, obviously, Octavian wasn't going to take this sort of claim lying down. And here we can see a coin of his own, struck the same year as the first one of Mark Antony's. This is a gold coin, and it was struck in gold. And you can see that here, perhaps even more thought has gone into what's going on. Certainly, advantages Octavian had have been used very, very carefully. So, if we look at the names of the two individuals, Octavian on the front, Caesar on the back, they're exactly the same, aren't they? Both individuals are styled Caius Caesar, C. Caesar. The name starts at the crown of the head and runs behind the back of the head there. And then we look at the faces. Now, of course, Octavian is Caesar's adopted son, but there's no reason for an adopted son to look like the father who's adopted him. But here you can see the idea is that the face of Octavian looks like a younger version of the face of Caesar. So that father-son idea is being pushed by the way the two are being portrayed. The titles of the two are very similar. Both the head of state. Octavian is a consul, that's at the bottom of the bust. Caesar is the dictator perpetuus. And again, remember that title has no stigma whatsoever in the Roman world. And Then after that, we've got religious titles. Caesar is Pontifex Maximus. Octavian is a Pontifex. You can see Pont there, the N and T joined together. And Aug afterwards here isn't Augustus, of course. He isn't Augustus in 43 BC. He hasn't had that title voted to him yet. Again, it's a claim to be an augur. It's Aug for augur at that point. Apart from those cleverly crafted similarities, perhaps we should have a look at the top coin as well. If we look at Octavian, we can see around the line of his jaw is a beard. This is a mourning beard. Romans often grew these to mark the passing of someone they cared about. So here, of course, this is a mark of filial piety. Octavian the son is mourning Caesar, his father. But maybe there's an extra twist as well, because we know that one of the insults that Antony used to fire at Octavian was "you little boy," "o puer," how he used to call him. We know this from a speech from Cicero. Little boys, of course, can't grow beards, and therefore here maybe as well there is a little jab back against Antony on this coin. Now, the cult of Julius Caesar perhaps culminates in this image, the image of the Sidus Iulium, or Caesar's star. This was a comet which went over Rome in 44 BC and is very, very frequently referred to in all sorts of places. On our coin we can see the star. We know it's a comet, so it has a tail, and that's why we've got that fire around the top the ray at that point. The star features heavily in literature. So it's in Horace, who may in fact have coined the phrase Sidus Iulium, but before then Virgil has written about it in his Eclogues. Eclogue 9 talks about a star which is going to come and bring peace and prosperity. It's in the Aeneid, which we'll come back to in a moment, and towards the end of Augustus's reign, Ovid's Metamorphoses talks about Venus taking Caesar up to heaven and his soul turning into a star on in that journey, halfway along in that journey. And then, of course, there's the Aeneid, perhaps the most famous reference to all of this. So in the 8th book of the Aeneid, we have Roman history, which culminates in the Battle of Actium. And in the culmination of the Battle of Actium, we have this phrase, "Here Caesar Augustus leads the Italians into battle. Over his head shines his father's star." Now, Octavian used that star straight away. As soon as it had happened, we know that he dedicated a statue to Caesar on the Capitoline Hill, and he put a star on its head. The dedication was Caesare, to Caesar, Emitheo. Now, if you put an H at the front of that word and think of words like hemisphere, you can see it's to Caesar, the half god, so to the deified god, the bloke who's a bit more than human at the end of the day. That cult, of course, continued with the temple of the deified Julius, vowed by Octavian in 42 BC, consecrated in 29 BC, and interestingly, when Pliny talks about this temple, he says it's the only place in the world where comet worship happens. And of course, the comet that he's talking about is the Sidus Iulium, Julius's star. So the coin here that we see is part of a much bigger propaganda nexus to emphasize the link between Octavian and Julius Caesar and the piety of Octavian by honouring the star which marked his father going up into heaven. And it's propaganda which, to be fair, worked rather well. Pliny, when he finishes talking about this temple and the comet, says, and to be fair, it did have a salutary effect across the world. So what was that salutary effect? Well, again, that also forms an important part of the emperor's image. Peace, Pax Augusta, peace brought about by Augustus. And here's a coin where we can see Octavian's head on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, an allegorical lady. She's holding an olive branch in one hand. I think you can make out an olive between the leaves there. And the curved object she's also holding in her other hand is a horn of plenty, a cornucopia, which is full of agricultural produce at the top. Now, prior to the Battle of Actium, Rome, of course, had endured around 100 years of civil war, and people were fed up of it. When Tacitus, writing about 100 years after Octavian's death, tried to work out why Octavian Augustus had succeeded so well, he noted that he drew all to his side by the pleasures of peace. Octavian brought peace to the world. This made him extremely popular. After all, peace is a good in itself, but peace brings plenty, and plenty tends to bring prosperity. The date of the coin is interesting, isn't it? We don't know which side of the Battle of Actium it was struck on. We know it was struck near that time, but it could have been just before or just after. So it might be a coin, say, come to war with me and I will bring peace and plenty to you when we've won. Or it might be, I've won the war and now here is peace and plenty coming as a result of that. You have to make your own mind up about that. Now, when we think about that coin, perhaps it's worth thinking about its sister at the same time. And here's its sister. As you can see, a coin struck in the same years as the one we've dealt with. Now, peace in modern times tends to be associated with an absence of war. It's the reverse of war. Most Romans, I think, would have thought that a rather odd proposition, because peace for them was not the opposite of war, but rather the product of a successful war. Again, let's think about the Aeneid for a moment. In Aeneid Book 6, Anchises in the underworld tells Aeneas what the destiny of the Romans is. And part of it is to impose, imponere, the custom of peace, morem parcis. And then there will be peace, but it only comes not by avoiding war, but by fighting and winning wars. Here we can see another lady. I think this is probably not peace, likely to be the goddess Venus, in fact. Could be peace, but I don't think so. Which emphasises, of course, the divine ancestry of the Julian house. But look behind her head. There, popping up, is our friend the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, and underneath her chin is again the olive branch. You can see the olives there along with the leaves. On the other side of the coin this time, not a bust of Octavian, but here we see him at full length, dressed in military uniform, carrying a spear and hailing his victorious troops. He is the victorious general who has won a war, has brought peace and prosperity as a consequence of it. And that notion that Augustus brings prosperity is a key message which comes across time and time again in not just coins, but other aspects of the image of the emperor. Here we can see a coin at the top, a gold coin struck centrally, but there are very many parallels from other parts of the empire. So here's a coin from Ephesus in the east of the empire, and one from Cordoba, south of Spain, in the west of the empire. On the back, very funny looking creature, half fish, half goat. This is Capricorn, the astrological sign, and it's Augustus's birth sign. Sometimes between his legs, Capricorn has the globe, and attached to it, that's not a spade, it's actually a ship's rudder. It's basically to say, this man is doing this across the world. Behind the Capricorn's head is again our friend, the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. The message is Augustus brings prosperity, and sometimes it's Augustus brings prosperity to the whole world. Now that message isn't just, of course, on coins, just like the star, where we can see it was in literature, in buildings, as well as on coins. This notion is also pushed very hard. Here's another very famous object from the Augustan period, the Prima Porta statue. And of course, the Prima Porta statue shows the emperor as a victorious general. Here he is, dressed as a Roman field marshal, wearing a breastplate. The centerpiece of the breastplate is a Parthian surrendering a standard to a Roman general. All of this is about Augustus as a great general. How honest that is for you to decide. Looking up at the main scene from the bottom is a lady, and I've made a close-up of her for you here. And you can see once again she is holding the horn of plenty, the cornucopia. The message is the same as the coins. The emperor is a great general. The general wins wars. The wars bring peace. The peace brings prosperity. But what sort of regime was going to bring this wonderful turn of events? Well, here's another famous quotation from a Roman, Cedent arma togae. Let arms yield to the toga. It was made by the politician Cicero, and of course it's a plea to say We need civilian constitutional rule. We don't want arbitrary rule by military dictators. And here's a coin which is saying exactly that from the point of view of Augustus. There's the front of the coin, Imperator Caesar, Divi Filius, the son of the deified one, the claim again to Julius Caesar. Cos is short for consul, 6 for the 6th time. That's very useful because we know that this coin must have been struck in 28 BC. We look on the reverse of the coin. The legend is again very interesting. Leges et jura PR, that's Popolo Romano, restituit. He has restored laws and legislation to the Roman people. The way that's phrased is important. It could have been phrased in quite an ambiguous way, just saying laws and the constitution, legislation have been restored to the Roman people. But we want the he in there, because of course the he is Octavian. And there we see him sitting down. He's not wearing a general's uniform here. He's wearing a toga. He's a civilian politician. The curious deck chair-like arrangement he's sitting on with the sort of folding up legs you can see on either side of the figure is again important. It's something called the sella curulis, the curule seat, the traditional chair for the traditional rulers of Rome, the consuls. Octavian isn't holding a stick, that's a scroll, and the bucket at his feet is where you would keep such scrolls. It's the Roman equivalent of a bookshelf at the end of the day. So once again, what we're saying here is the time of arbitrary military rule, the civil wars, is past. I have brought back proper constitutional rule to the Roman people. The date is also interesting, isn't it? Because 28 BC is the year just before the first of Augustus's great constitutional settlements in 27 BC, in which, of course, he thought he could rule as a consul constantly. So this depiction of him as a consul bringing back constitutional rule is clever propaganda, not only at just the level of saying I've done this, but also paving the way for the ideas of the constitutional settlement of 27 BC. How constitutional was all of that? Remember, it was kings who liked to have their pictures on coins at the end of the Roman Republic, and of course the Romans had a deep horror of the notion of kingship. On the other hand, coins of course present opportunities that were too good to be missed. The most famous quotation about Roman coins comes from the Bible, and it's a moment of course when the Pharisees try to trick Jesus. So he says, give me a coin. So they brought him a denarius, standard Roman silver coin about the size of a modern 5p piece. And he asked them, whose image is this? And whose inscription? And they said, Caesar's. Now then, that's important because it shows that everybody knew around the empire that the man whose head was on the coins was their ruler. In a world where there's no TV, no newspapers, that is an ideal way of getting that message across. And of course, on the reverse of the coin, you can put out messages about how you're ruling that you want your people to see. Octavian Augustus could have restored the Republic in a way by going back to traditional Roman coins. He chose not to do that. You can see why, but it is a big innovation. Perhaps he's really the reason why we still have rulers on coins to this day. On the other hand, he was careful. There's no diadem. There's no crown. Usually he's bareheaded. He's got a very simple haircut because the Romans, of course, are a simple people, or that's how they like to think about themselves anyway. And there's little in the way of a diadem. On the other hand, this is a coin from the later part of Augustus's rule, and you can see he's got a laurel wreath on, and it's sort of tied on by strings which hang down the back of his neck. Well, that's sort of okay. After all, he'd been voted a laurel wreath by the Senate. Perfectly reasonable, just like someone today wearing their medals. On the other hand, it sort of looks a bit like a diadem, doesn't it? And maybe just as the word Augustus is saying, I'm not God, but I'm quite special, the way that this man puts his head on coins, the way that he presents himself on those coins, is hinting at the same sorts of ideas that we see with Augustus. So I hope you can see coins are just interesting in themselves. There are lots of little details there, but they also help us fill out big parts of how the emperor wanted to present his image and the sorts of things he thought were important to safeguard and promote that image. And anyway, I hope this has engendered some interest in coins, and happy numismatics.